I think there is no doubt that the international community needs Russia to be involved in many major undertakings, including certainly the Syria program. It is really often been the case that Russia was essential to, say, the European Union or the US in at least some key operations, whether it was the US intervention in Afghanistan or whether it's the combating organized crime routes and trafficking. And certainly in the Syrian case right now. The interesting question that everybody is asking is rather how to engage Russia in a constructive way, how to make sure that we are on the same page with the same goals and adopting the same strategies. That's obviously at the moment looks not very successful, and clearly West-Russian relations can only be described as being at a very low point at the moment. And I think the most constructive way to go about figure it out has to start from gaining a better, more nuanced, more sophisticated understanding of how Russia works. Because I think there is a strong component of domestic politics, domestic Russian politics, driving what we see Russia doing externally. And it's a very long and complicated story, but in a nutshell, I think that's perhaps what's been missing in a lot of the debates up to now, a sophisticated understanding of what drives, what kind of internal dynamics in Russia can drive Russia's posturing outside. And it has to do with a number of things. But surrounding the difficulty or the challenge of legitimation that the regime, and like any regime, is constantly struggling with. Now, in a democratic system, there are ways and procedures for a government to legitimize itself through the vote, through the ballot box, at regular intervals. In a non-democratic setup, there has to be other ways, and arguably for a number of years, particularly from the time Putin came to power, at least until the economic crisis, 2007-2008, there has been a way of legitimation that was based on material progress for the bulk of the Russian population. So in other words, living conditions were improving. Wages were being paid on time, pensions were being paid and increased. A lot of state employees saw their salaries grow over this period. The number of state employees also grew quite dramatically. The economy in general was attracting a lot of foreign investment. Oil prices went dramatically up in the run-up to 2007. So there was a way for the regime to claim legitimacy also on the basis of performance. We can debate whether they should take a lot of credit for that performance, or to what extent it was due to happy conjuncture of international factors such as oil prices. But nevertheless, they could achieve a degree of legitimation based on performance. Now, since the end of 2012, 2013, before the Ukraine crisis, the economy had already given signs of stagnating. And so the engine that had fueled the Russian economy had stopped that dynamism that it had showed previously. Oil prices have already had an impact in the sense that they had started to decline. But nevertheless, it is an economy that is so dependent on oil prices, on the oil sector, the energy sector, and on big state corporations in mining, in other sectors, transport, that struggles to diversify into more high-tech sectors and struggles to create the conditions that would then foster entrepreneurship, innovation, and create a stratum of small and medium enterprises, which is the kind of businesses that tend to create jobs and tend to create innovation in other economies. So the regime was confronted with that picture of declining performance of the economy, and Putin's own approval ratings had started to decline from very high levels. They had reached into the 60s from the 80s already in 2013. And when the Ukraine crisis emerged, Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president, was ousted, and Russia annexed Crimea. That offered an opportunity for the regime, Putin primarily, to reassert a legitimation that was perhaps weakening. And certainly that worked, at least until so far it has worked in the sense that it has created a mood in the country which is extremely widespread across all sectors of society, even the more well-educated, the better off layers of the population, a mood for national pride and for appreciation of regaining a part of territory that most people would consider historically being part of Russia. And that has played into the hands of regime stability and certainly in terms of Putin's own popularity, which has gone back quite quickly when Crimea was annexed, very, very suddenly gone back to the 80 level, 80, 85, 86. And it has also created an environment where you have such a confrontation with the West as a result that you, as a regime, you are offered an opportunity to entrench yourself in a position of power, claiming that you are defending the country from external threats, and that your previous partners are up to destabilizing your political regime, your country, and ultimately, Russia risks perhaps even being dismembered, or chaos, or sharp economic decline, unless we stick together as a country, and we need all the support that we can get. And we cannot tolerate, in these difficult times, we cannot tolerate dissent. We need to identify and marginalize and get rid of, for example, independent sources of destabilization, as they would call it. And so you've seen a tightening of the screw in terms of the regulation on the media, in terms of the regulation of the internet, in independent NGOs, or NGOs that are suddenly classed as being politically active, even though they were not necessarily politically active, and therefore falling under the legislation that prohibits, that requires NGOs and organizations who receive foreign funding to be registered as such with the authorities, and is subject to certain restrictions and so on. Also more pressures on the opposition. But the fundamental, I think, sorry, a very long answer, but I think one of the less understood dimensions of the Russian political and social system is the extent to which it is a system, and the extent to which what we are seeing today is not just the work of a nasty elite at the top, and replacing a few personalities at the top potentially would not make all that much difference. And on the contrary, there are also potentials for a change of regime in the wrong direction, in a more nationalist, even more nationalist and even more populist direction, unfortunately. And that's simply because the socioeconomic setup of the country, even the sort of the industrial structure of the country, makes the vast majority of the population, in one way or the other, dependent on the state for their livelihoods. Whether they are state employees, because they are teachers, military personnel, bureaucrats, or they work in state-controlled enterprises, or they work in enterprises that are nominally majority privately owned, but they are nevertheless controlled by people who are very loyal to the regime. So what you get is a vast majority of the population who doesn't really have much opportunity for independent political activism and posturing. So they will tend to not protest, for example, even if privately they may not agree with this or that policy, or they see their living standards at the moment decline. Some protests do emerge from time to time here and there, but it's very difficult for it to become organized or take on any sort of critical mass. The sort of the nationalist moods, the propaganda through the media is also playing its part in that sense. So structurally, you have very deep reasons why long-term the situation is unlikely to dramatically improve with easy solutions. Effectively, even in the 1990s, when a major transformation of the economy was going on, for good or worse, in Russia never really experienced the kind of transition from a patronal, particularistic type of society into a society that is more driven by, or regulated by, universalistic norms of market economy, competition, autonomy, civil society autonomy, which have emerged historically in Western Europe first, over a very long and difficult process that took several centuries, if you want to be precise, and they were then exported in North America, Australia. But so Russia has not really yet made that transition towards a political and social system that is underpinned by the rule of law, by universalistic norms of meritocracy. It is still a society where personal connections and networks count for more than the rights of the individual. So that's a huge oversimplification of extremely complex issues, but I hope it gives you a flavor of some of the issues that we need to understand in order to be realistic about what we can expect from Russia, how we can engage Russia, what constraints the leadership of Russia operates under, and what incentives they have in terms of needing to remain in power, like any other politician aspires to do, with those kind of rules, with those kind of personalistic, patronal dynamics at play. So I think that would be the very first step that we need to do in order to then try and engage Russia more holistically elsewhere. Yeah.